Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff, completely out of options. You're asking the void if your only remaining choice is to just, well, end it all.
It's an incredibly dark place to be.
It is. We're starting today's deep dive by looking at first-hand footage of a 40-year-old man who just sold his home for 400,000 RMB. Now, that sounds like a decent sum of money.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But it was just to pay off a fraction of a crushing 700,000 RMB online debt. He has lost the roof over his head, he still owes an absolute fortune, and he is publicly asking in sheer desperation if his only way out is to die.
It really sets a heavy tone right from the start.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are really glad you are here with us. Today's mission it's intense. We're looking beyond the polished official macroeconomic reports that usually dominate the headlines.
The ones that tend to smooth over the actual reality.
Exactly. Instead, we are unpacking raw, first-hand accounts from a YouTube channel documenting the severe economic and social struggles currently unfolding on the ground in China. We want to understand the human toll, the sweeping unemployment, the staggering wealth disparity, and a catastrophic debt crisis.
And before we get into the mechanics of what is actually happening on the ground, let's establish some ground rules for you. We are looking closely at first-hand accounts and the genuine frustrations provided in our source material.
Right, just the raw footage and stories.
Yes. We are not taking political sides here, neither left nor right. We aren't endorsing any specific ideology. Our goal is strictly to impartially explore what these citizens are reporting about their daily realities and to analyze the economic conditions driving those realities.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the contrast between the economic powerhouse we usually read about and the reality these citizens are filming is jarring. Let's start with the illusion of recovery and this massive employment freeze.
It's a stark contrast.
We're looking at footage filmed on the 10th day of the Lunar New Year. Traditionally, this is the exact moment when factory towns roar back to life, right?
Oh, absolutely. Migrant workers return from their home provinces, the massive industrial machines turn on, and the export economy just starts humming.
But the footage shows industrial zones that look like absolute ghost towns. The streets are empty, someone lit a few firecrackers for the holiday, and then because there is absolute no work to be found, everyone just went back to sleep.
While the empty factories are a stark visual, I'd argue the real story isn't just the visible unemployment. It's what people are enduring to navigate a complete collapse of labor demand, meeting a massive oversupply of desperate workers.
Yeah, the human logistics of it.
Right. The source details a grueling logistical nightmare for one specific migrant worker. He traveled 2,000 kilometers from Yunnan to Ziyang. He spent 10 full days desperately searching for a job.
10 days of just knocking on doors.
And when he found absolutely nothing, he got back in his vehicle and drove another 1,000 kilometers to Jiangsu.
Wait, so 3,000 kilometers of travel, 10 days of pounding the pavement, and where does he end up?
He ends up sleeping in his car. He couldn't even afford a cheap motel. And the footage includes him issuing a stark warning to anyone watching. He says, if you haven't left your home village yet, don't come. There are no jobs.
It is incredibly bleak. And for the factories that actually did try to open, the reality is almost a dark comedy. There is this completely bizarre workaround detailed in the source.
Oh, the holiday recall?
Yes, a factory recalled its workers right after the holiday. People spent over 30 hours stuck in horrendous holiday traffic just to get back.
40 hours of gridlock.
Some couldn't even secure train tickets, but they fought their way back to the factory floor because they were desperate for the income. They finally arrived. The factory runs normal operations for exactly 1.5 days, and then management sends everyone home on a mandatory 2-week holiday.
That really highlights the absurdity of the current market dynamics.
Right. Imagine sitting in 30 hours of traffic just to be immediately given a mandatory unpaid vacation. Why force them back at all?
What's fascinating here is the sheer disconnect between supply and demand. It's a classic manifestation of a demand-side shock. They force everyone back just to maintain the appearance of operating.
Like for the local government?
Perhaps to satisfy local government quotas or to keep up appearances for their creditors. But appearances don't pay the bills. They shut down immediately because there are 0 actual orders coming in.
They have the workers, just no work.
Exactly. You have this eager, highly mobile labor force willing to travel across the country, but the jobs available have plummeted in quality. Wages are effectively frozen 3,000 to 4,000 RMB a month. Finding a job that pays 5,000 RMB is incredibly rare right now.
And the desperation to secure even those low-paying jobs leads to some really tough scenes. The source shows an early morning labor market, and it's not young people looking for work.
No, it's the older generation.
We are talking about elderly workers, people well into their twilight years, swarming and physically fighting over heavy manual warehouse clearing jobs.
And they are begging to do it for little to no pay, just to secure a spot in the labor line. When you have elderly citizens brawling over exploitative, physically demanding temp work, you are witnessing a systemic failure to support the working class.
Which brings us to a really difficult realization that many of the younger workers are having. They are sitting down, doing the fundamental math of their own survival, and choosing to just stay home.
Because the math just doesn't add up anymore.
It doesn't. Looking at the numbers, it makes perfect economic sense. If you go out and exhaust yourself doing temp work for these slashed wages, after you pay for your rent in the city, your food, and basic utilities, you might only have 10,000 to 20,000 RMB in net profit for the entire year.
The margin is practically non-existent.
So people are deciding to just stay in their rural villages. They save on rent, they grow some of their own food, and they avoid the humiliation of sleeping in their cars.
It's a rational choice in an irrational system.
But this raises a massive question for you to consider. If China's economy has grown so exponentially over the last few decades and so much infrastructure has been built, why is the working class feeling so incredibly hopeless? Where did the money actually go?
That is the pivotal question. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source points directly at a staggering statistic regarding wealth distribution. According to the material, 92% of the wealth is concentrated in the hands of just 10% of the population.
Wait, 92%? That completely recontextualizes everything we just talked about regarding the factory closures.
It really does. It means the people creating the wealth are structurally locked out of it. It's not just a temporary economic downturn, it's a structural ceiling.
Built into the system.
Yes. The system was designed for explosive infrastructure growth and export dominance, not for household wealth transfer. When a society relentlessly pursues GDP growth without focusing on equitable distribution, the working class has no safety net to fall back on when the music stops.
Because they never actually accumulated any of that wealth.
Right. Economic growth is meaningless to the average citizen if it never reaches their pockets. And more importantly, from a macroeconomic perspective, when the wealth doesn't reach the middle and lower classes, they cannot consume.
They aren't buying anything.
Exactly. Without robust domestic consumption, factories get zero orders, they shut down, and the entire engine of the economy grinds to a halt.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, where the math turns terrifying. Because the lack of income is only half the story. The other half is what people are doing to survive that lack of income.
The debt side of the equation.
The source pivots to a mass debt crisis, and the scale of this is like a ticking time bomb for systemic deleveraging. Let's look at the hard numbers being reported. Out of the entire population, a staggering 850 million people are in debt.
850 million. Let that sink in for a second.
470 million of those people are on the verge of defaulting. 260 million have already been overdue on their payments for more than half a year.
And we have to clarify what happens when they default, because it's not just a ding on a credit report like you might be used to. The source notes that 8.6 million people have been officially blacklisted by the system as dishonest executors.
Right. And we need to explain what that actually means on the ground.
It is essentially social and economic paralysis. Being a dishonest executor means you are banned from buying high-speed train tickets. You cannot take flights, you are restricted from staying in certain hotels, and it becomes nearly impossible to get a regular formal job.
You are effectively exiled from participating in the modern economy.
Completely. And with property foreclosures projected to jump from 3 million last year to 5 million this year, that blacklist is only going to grow.
Those numbers are astronomical. And it gets worse when you look at who specifically is holding this debt. This isn't just a few over-leveraged corporations. This is an entire generation. Yes, the source focuses heavily on the post-90s demographic.
Right, the prime working age population. These are the people who should theoretically be driving domestic consumption, buying homes, starting families, and building the future tax base.
The core of the economy.
There are 175 million people in this demographic. And according to the source, a massive 87% of them are in debt.
87%, that is wild.
Only 13% are debt-free. You have essentially hollowed out the financial stability of the most critical demographic in the country.
And the timeline for when this debt bomb actually detonates isn't some distant future scenario that economists are projecting for the 2030s.
No, the source predicts a devastating peak in debt defaults happening right now. It is crucial to note that today's date is March 3, 2026. According to the timeline laid out in the footage, we're sitting directly inside the explosion period of 2026, 2027, and 2028.
We are in the blast radius right now.
Exactly. This 3-year window is where the compounding pressure of unemployment, slashed wages, and structural debt is predicted to reach its breaking point across the entire society.
To really grasp how an entire generation gets swallowed whole by this, the source shares a deeply humanizing anecdote about the narrator's own cousin. And this isn't a story about someone who was reckless or unemployed.
No, he was doing relatively well.
The cousin comes over on New Year's Eve, has a few drinks, and completely breaks down crying at the dinner table. Now, this cousin actually has a good white-collar job. He earns 15,000 RMB a month. That is substantially higher than the 3,000 to 4,000 RMB factory wages we were discussing earlier.
It's a very solid income.
But he is secretly suffocating under 100,000 RMB of online loan debt. He is weeping because he feels like he is drowning, and the source uses his story to explain the anatomy of the net loan trap.
And we need to break down the predatory math of these online loans, because this is how the trap functions. These aren't standard amortizing loans like a traditional mortgage or car payment where your interest decreases as you pay down the principal.
They operate under a completely different logic.
They are designed to be mathematically inescapable. First, the annual interest rates are exorbitant, ranging from 23% to 36%. If you borrow 10,000 RMB to cover an emergency, you are paying back 13,000 RMB in a year.
But the real trap is in the repayment structure itself. Let's look at the cousin's 100,000 RMB loan. The monthly repayment demands incredibly aggressive principal paydowns. For instance, requiring him to pay over 8,300 RMB toward the principal every single month, plus the interest.
Exactly. And here is the core mechanism of the trap. They use a fixed principal interest calculation. That 36% annual percentage rate is applied to the original 100,000 RMB principal in perpetuity, regardless of how much he has already paid down over the year.
That is the absolute kicker. You would naturally assume that if you aggressively pay down half the loan, your interest burden gets cut in half.
But it doesn't.
No, these platforms perpetually calculate the interest based on the initial borrowed amount. It is a compounding nightmare.
It is a debt servicing treadmill that never ends. The source makes it very clear once a borrower crosses that 100,000 RMB debt threshold, the math turns entirely against them.
Even with a 15,000 RMB salary.
Yes. Even if someone has a relatively stable income, the sheer weight of the aggressive principal demands, combined with the unrelenting, non-decreasing interest, makes it mathematically impossible to escape. They are trapped in a cycle of paying thousands of RMB a month just to keep the loan from defaulting.
Just to avoid that dishonest executor blacklist.
Right, but they're never actually escaping the debt. The financial product is quite literally designed to consume their future earnings indefinitely.
So, what does this all mean? When we look at all these pieces together, the empty factories, the staggering wealth concentration, the mass debt, we are seeing a brutal self-sustaining cycle.
A feedback loop of sorts.
It starts at the top with a structural ceiling where 92% of the wealth is hoarded. That leads to a working class that simply cannot afford to consume. A lack of domestic consumption leads to zero orders for the factory.
Which means the factories close.
Which leads to mass unemployment and severely slashed wages. Desperate citizens, just trying to survive or bridge the gap until the economy recovers, are pushed into predatory online loans.
Out of pure necessity.
And because of the structural inequality and the predatory fixed principal math, those loans can never realistically be repaid. It is a closed loop of economic despair.
It truly is a closed loop, and for you, listening to this, it serves as a masterclass in how incredibly fragile a society becomes when the working class is hollowed out. Economic stability isn't just about high-level GDP growth or building massive infrastructure projects.
It's about the people on the ground.
It is about the health and liquidity of the base. When 87% of your prime working demographic is drowning in debt, your domestic economy has no foundation. This situation highlights the devastating danger of unregulated, predatory financial instruments.
They're radioactive to the economy.
These online loans aren't just hurting individuals who made bad financial decisions. They are rapidly destabilizing an entire demographic's ability to ever participate in the consumer economy again. When people are dedicating all of their disposable income just to service insurmountable debt, they aren't buying consumer goods.
They aren't starting small businesses.
And they aren't investing in their future. The entire economic engine suffocates.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to ponder today. We have looked at the math, the empty industrial parks, and the human despair of the people living through this. But let's zoom out to the macro, systemic level.
The big picture.
We're talking about 850 million people in debt, with a massive wave of defaults predicted to hit right now between 2026 and 2028. If hundreds of millions of people collectively default on their debts simply because they mathematically have no other choice, the unspoken social contract between the working class and the system fractures.
Completely breaks down.
The question is, how does a highly centralized system enforce financial compliance and social order on a scale that massive without completely destroying the fragile remnants of its own domestic economy in the process? It is a precarious balancing act, and one that will undoubtedly define the next few years. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.